I went to pick up my 5-year-old son from my mother-in-law's house. But his favorite toy was lying broken on the front step. No one answered the door, so I called the police. When the officer came out, he said, "Sir, you're not going to like this." I asked, "What happened?" He said, "Your son is all ready." The afternoon sun filtered through the pines along Alder Lane, casting dappled patterns across the asphalt. Joseph Pierce guided his truck through the familiar streets of Maple Ridge, Oregon. His mind half in the inventory reports, waiting back at the shop, and half on the knowledge that in just a few minutes, he'd see his son's face light up when he arrived. Mark always ran to the door when he heard the engine, his small sneakers slapping against the hardwood, his voice already calling out before Joseph could even turn the key. Thursday afternoons had become their ritual. Ruth worked late at the county clerk's office on Thursdays, so Joseph would leave the auto shop early, pick up Mark from Nane's house, and take him to the playground near the old mill. Sometimes they'd stop for ice cream. Mark always ordered chocolate, then changed his mind to strawberry, then back to chocolate again, while the teenager behind the counter waited with patient amusement. Joseph turned onto Alder Lane, the tree-lined street where his mother-in-law had lived for 30 years. The house sat back from the road, a modest ranch-style home with white siding that Nane kept obsessively clean. The lawn was trimmed to precision, the flower beds edged with military straightness. Everything about Nane's life was controlled, ordered, managed down to the smallest detail. He learned early in his marriage to Ruth that disagreeing with her mother meant trouble. Not the loud, explosive kind, but the cold, calculated kind that manifested in passive-aggressive comments at family dinners and phone calls that went unreturned for weeks. Ruth had warned him when they first started dating. "My mother has very specific ideas about how things should be. It's easier to just go along with it." Joseph had tried. For Ruth's sake, he'd bitten his tongue through countless dinners where Nane criticized everything from his choice of beer to the way he parked his truck. He'd smiled through a thinly veiled suggestions that Ruth had married beneath her potential. He nodded politely when she'd insisted on particular parenting methods, even when they contradicted what he and Ruth had agreed upon. But lately, something had shifted in Nane. She'd become more irritable, more volatile. Last month, Ruth had mentioned that her mother had snapped at Mark for spilling juice, grabbing his arm hard enough to leave a red mark. Ruth had confronted her about it, and Nane had dismissed it as an accident, claiming Mark had exaggerated. Joseph had wanted to say something then, had wanted to tell Ruth that maybe Mark shouldn't spend so much time alone with her mother. But Ruth's relationship with Nane was complicated, woven through with guilt and obligation and a desperate need for approval that Joseph didn't fully understand. So he'd stayed quiet, trusting that Ruth knew her own mother better than he did. Now, as he approached the house, something felt wrong. The sensation hit him before he could identify why. A prickling at the base of his skull, an instinct honed from years of diagnosing engine troubles by the quality of silence when he turned off the ignition. This silence was wrong. Then he saw it. Mark's toy truck sat on the front step, broken cleanly in half. The bright red paint gleamed in the afternoon light, but the plastic body had been snapped apart. The tiny wheels separated from chassis. Mark loved that truck. He carried it everywhere, made engine noises as he rolled it across tables and floors and the armrest of Joseph's truck during their drives together. Joseph killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the broken toy. Mark wouldn't have left it outside, wouldn't have broken it, and just walked away. The boy treated that truck like a treasure possession. The front door stood slightly ajar. Joseph's hand moved to the door handle, but his body felt distant, moving through water. He stepped out of the truck, his work boots crunching on a gravel drive. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet. No sound of children playing. No distant lawnmowers, no birds. He climbed the 3 steps to the porch, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs. Through the gap in the doorway, he could see into the living room. The lights were on, but something was wrong with the furniture. The coffee table sat an odd angle when the sofa cushions lay on the floor. "Nane," his voice came out rougher than he'd intended. "Mark," no answer. Joseph pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The scene that greeted him made his breath catch in his throat. The living room looked like it had been ransacked. Drawers hung open. Their contents spilled across the carpet. Couch cushions had been thrown aside. A lamp lay on its side near the entertainment center, its shade dented. The TV remote sat in the middle of the floor, batteries scattered around it. His mind tried to make sense of it. A robbery. Someone had broken in while Nane was watching Mark. But where were they? Why was the house so quiet? Then he saw the cereal. A box of Cheerios had been knocked off the counter, its contents forming a golden pool on the kitchen tile. And there, pressed into the scattered oats, was a footprint, small, child-sized, the treads of a sneaker, clearly visible in the cereal dust. "Mark." Joseph's voice cracked as he called out louder now, urgency replacing confusion. Mark, where are you? He moved through the living room, his eyes scanning for any sign of his son. The dining room was untouched. The kitchen showed only the spilled cereal and an overturned chair. He pushed open the door to the hallway, and that's when he noticed the silence wasn't complete. A faint dripping sound came from the bathroom. Joseph's hands had begun to shake. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. His fingers clumsy on the screen. As it rang, he moved down the hallway. The bathroom door was open, the faucet running, water pooling on the floor. 911. What's your emergency? I'm at 847 Alder Lane. The house looks like it's been broken into. My son was here with his grandmother and I can't find them. Something's wrong. Something's really wrong. Sir, are you safe? Is anyone else in the house? I don't know. I just got here. The door was open. Everything's torn apart and my son's toy is broken outside and I can't find him. I'm dispatching officers now. Sir, I need you to leave the house and wait for her. But Joseph had already moved past the bathroom, past the guest room, to the door at the end of the hall. Nain's bedroom. The door was closed. He turned the handle. The bedroom was neat, untouched by whatever had happened in the living room. The bed was made with hospital corners. The dresser stood against the far wall, family photos arranged in precise rows. And there, on the floor beside the bed, was Mark. The boy lay on his side, his small body perfectly still. His eyes were closed. His face was pale. One arm was bent at an unnatural angle beneath him. And there was something dark matting the hair at the back of his head. Joseph didn't remember moving. Didn't remember dropping the phone or falling to his knees beside his son. The 911 operator's voice crackled from the phone on the carpet, asking questions Joseph couldn't hear over the roaring in his ears. He reached out with trembling hands and touched Mark's cheek. The skin was cool. Too cool. No. The word came out as barely a whisper. No. 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 Mark. Mark. Wake up. Come on, buddy. Wake up. He wanted to scoop the boy into his arms, to shake him awake, to undo whatever had happened. But some distant part of his brain, the part that had taken a first aid course at the fire station, told him not to move the body, not to disturb anything, not to contaminate evidence. Evidence. The word felt obscene. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Joseph sat back on his heels, his hands hovering over his son's body, afraid to touch, unable to look away. Mark's favorite shirt, the one with the cartoon dinosaur, was twisted around his small torso. One sneaker had come off. The laces on the other were untied. The front door banged open and heavy footsteps pounded through the house. Police. Anyone here? Back here. Joseph's voice broke. In the bedroom, please help him. Please. Two officers appeared in the doorway, hands on their weapons, eyes scanning the room with professional intensity. The older one, a woman with gray streaked hair, pulled into a tight bun, took in the scene in a single glance. Her expression shifted from alert caution to something softer, something worse. Sir, I need you to step back. Joseph didn't move. Couldn't move. Sir, please let us do our job. The younger officer, barely out of his 20s by the look of him, approached carefully and knelt beside Mark. He checked for a pulse, checked for breathing, his movements quick and efficient. After a moment that stretched into eternity, he looked up at his partner and gave a small, sharp shake of his head. The older officer moved to Joseph's side and gently but firmly helped him to his feet. Come on, let's get you out of here. That's my son. Joseph's voice sounded hollow, unrecognizable. That's Mark. He's 5. He just turned 5 last month. We had a party at the park with dinosaur cupcakes. He's 5 years old. I know. I'm so sorry, but we need to preserve the scene. Can you come with me? Just out to the living room. She guided him out of the bedroom, past the bathroom with its running faucet, past the pictures on the wall of Ruth and Nain and family gatherings that now felt like they belonged to some other life. They sat him on the couch in the living room among the scattered cushions and overturned furniture. More sirens outside, more footsteps, voices calling out to each other in calm, professional tones that seemed impossible given what lay in the back bedroom. A paramedic appeared, asked Joseph questions he barely heard, checked his pulse, looked into his eyes with a pen light. The older officer crouched in front of him. Her name plate read Sergeant Delgado. Sir, I need to ask you some questions. I know this is difficult, but time is important. Can you tell me your name? Joseph. Joseph Pierce. That's my son, Mark. Mark Pierce. And you said your son was here with his grandmother, Nain. Nain Harlow, my mother-in-law. She watches him on Thursday afternoons while my wife works late. Where is Mrs. Harlow now? The question cut through Joseph's shock. Where is Nain? He'd been so focused on Mark, so consumed by the horror of finding his son that he hadn't fully registered her absence. I don't know. She wasn't here when I arrived. The door was open. The house was like this, and Mark was. He couldn't finish the sentence. Delgado exchanged a glance with another officer who had appeared in the doorway. We need to locate the grandmother. Put out a call. Wait. Joseph's mind was starting to work again, pushing through the numbness. Her car. Her car was gone. I didn't even think about it. She drives a blue Honda. It wasn't in the driveway. Make model. 2015 Civic. License plate. He struggled to remember. How many times had he seen that car? It has a dent in the rear bumper. Passenger side. She backed into a mailbox last year. More officers moved through the house now, photographing, measuring, speaking in radios. The younger officer emerged from the bedroom, his face carefully neutral, and conferred with Delgado in low tones. Joseph caught fragments. Head trauma. Several hours. No signs of forced entry. That last phrase registered. No signs of forced entry, but the living room was destroyed. Someone had broken in. Someone had hurt Mark and scared Nain away or worse. Unless the thought formed before Joseph could stop it, dark and terrible. He pushed it away, but it lingered at the edges of his awareness like smoke. Delgado's phone rang. She stepped away to answer it. Her voice too quiet for Joseph to hear. When she returned, her expression had changed. Harder, more focused. Mr. Pierce, we've located Mrs. Harlow. She's at a neighbor's house 3 doors down. She called 911 about 20 minutes ago, reporting a break-in. Says she ran from the house in fear. 20 minutes ago, Joseph had arrived 15 minutes ago, which meant Nain had already left, had already run to the neighbor's house, had already called police before he'd even pulled onto Alder Lane, and she'd left Mark here, alone, dead or dying. The darkness in his chest spread, cold and absolute. I need to call my wife. His voice came from somewhere far away. Ruth doesn't know. She's at work. She doesn't know. Delgado nodded. Do you want us to send someone to tell her in person? Sometimes that's easier than no. The word came out sharp. No, I'll call her. She should hear it from me. But when he pulled out his phone and looked at Ruth's name and his contacts, his thumb hovered over the screen, unable to press the call button. How do you tell someone their child was dead? What words existed for that conversation? Delgado seemed to understand. Take your time, or we can have a victim advocate make the call if you'd prefer. Joseph shook his head. He pressed the button. Ruth answered on the second ring, her voice bright and distracted. Hey hon, did you get Mark okay? I've got about 100 people waiting to file deeds and I'm drowning here. Ruth. His voice cracked her name in half. The brightness vanished. Joseph, what's wrong? What happened? You need to come to your mother's house right now. Is Mark okay? Did something happen? Is he hurt? Joseph closed his eyes. The words wouldn't come, wouldn't form, wouldn't be real if he didn't say them. Joseph, you're scaring me. Tell me what's going on. There was an incident at the house. Mark, he drew a breath that felt like swallowing glass. Mark didn't make it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He's gone. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long he thought the call had dropped. Then he heard a sound low and wounded like an animal in pain. No. Ruth's voice shook. No, that's not possible. You're wrong. You made a mistake. Let me talk to him. Put him on the phone. Ruth, please come to the house. I need you here. Put my son on the phone. Joseph, I can't. He's no. The word rose to a scream. No. 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 Not Mark. Not my baby. Joseph heard crashes in the background. Ruth's co-workers try and calm her, asking what happened. Someone took the phone. This is Elizabeth Moreno. I work with Ruth. What's going on? Joseph explained in clipped sentences. An incident. His son, Alder Lane. She needed to bring Ruth here now. Oh my God. Okay. Okay. We're coming. 20 minutes. The call ended. Joseph sat among the ruins of his mother-in-law's living room and stared at the broken toy truck visible through the open front door. 20 minutes felt like a lifetime and not nearly long enough. The waiting room at the Maple Ridge Police Department smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Joseph sat in a molded plastic chair, his hands clasped between his knees, staring at a water stain on the ceiling tile above him. Ruth sat 3 chairs away, close enough to touch, but separated by a gulf neither of them knew how to cross. She'd arrived at Nain's house in a whirlwind of anguish, her co-worker Elizabeth half carrying her up the front walk. The sound she'd made when the reality hit her. When she understood that her son was truly gone, would live in Joseph's memory forever. A wail that started low and built to something primal, something that stripped away every pretense of civilization and revealed the raw animal grief beneath. The police had tried to stop her from going into the bedroom, but Ruth had fought past them with a strength Joseph didn't know she possessed. He'd followed her in, watched her collapse beside Mark's small body, gathering him into her arms despite the officer's protests about preserving the scene. "My baby," she'd sobbed, rocking him. "My sweet baby boy, wake up. Please wake up. Mommy's here. Mommy's here now." It had taken 3 people to eventually ease her away, to pry her arms from around Mark's cooling body. She'd fought them, screaming that they couldn't take him, that she wasn't leaving without her son. Joseph had held her as she thrashed and wailed, her tears soaking through his shirt, her fingernails digging crescent into his forearms. Now, 2 hours later, she sat hollow-eyed and silent, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her own pieces together. Sergeant Delgado emerged from a hallway accompanied by a man in a rumpled suit who introduced himself as Detective Frank Morrison. He had the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too much and the careful movements of someone trying not to spook a frightened animal. "Mr. and Mrs. Pierce, thank you for your patience. I know this is an impossibly difficult time. We have some preliminary information we need to discuss with you." Ruth didn't look up. Joseph nodded slowly. Morrison pulled over a chair and sat facing them. Delgado remained standing, her arms crossed, her expression neutral but watchful. "First, I want to say how deeply sorry we are for your loss. Mark was a beautiful child, and no parent should have to go through what you're experiencing." Joseph waited. The detective's sympathy felt like noise. Well-intentioned, but ultimately meaningless. Words couldn't change what had happened. Couldn't bring Mark back. "We've conducted a preliminary investigation of the scene and we have some concerns about the narrative we've been given." Ruth's head came up slowly. "What does that mean?" Morrison chose his words carefully. "Mrs. Harlow claims that someone broke into the house while she was watching Mark. She says the intruder attacked her, that she fought back and ran to a neighbor's house in fear for her life. However, the physical evidence doesn't support that account." "I don't understand." Ruth's voice was barely a whisper. "What evidence?" "There were no signs of forced entry. No broken windows, no jimmy locks. The front door was unlocked when Mr. Pierce arrived, but there's no indication anyone broke it open." Joseph's mind flashed to the living room, but the house was torn apart. The furniture, the drawers, everything was thrown around. "Yes, but in a specific pattern. In our experience, burglars don't stage scenes. They take valuables and leave." Mrs. Harlow's television, laptop, and jewelry were all untouched. The chaos was confined to the living room and appeared to be. Morrison paused, clearly weighing how much to say. It appeared to be deliberately created to suggest a struggle. The cold feeling in Joseph's chest expanded. "You think my mother-in-law is lying?" Ruth made a small sound of protest. "That's insane. Why would my mother lie about something like this? Her grandson is dead. You think she had something to do with it?" Morrison's expression remained carefully neutral. "We're not making any accusations at this time. We're simply noting inconsistencies between Mrs. Harlow's statement and the physical evidence. We'll need to conduct further interviews and wait for the medical examiner's report before drawing any conclusions. This is a mistake." Ruth's voice rose, gaining strength from anger. "My mother would never hurt Mark. Never. She loved him. She watched him every week. You're trying to turn this into something it's not." Delgado spoke up for the first time, her voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Pierce, we understand this is difficult to hear, but we have to follow the evidence wherever it leads. That's how we find the truth about what happened to your son. The truth is someone broke in my mother's house and killed my baby." Ruth shot to her feet, her hands clenched into fists, "And instead of finding who did it, you're harassing a 62-year-old woman who just lost her grandson." Joseph reached for her arm, but she jerked away from him. "Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me right now." The venom in her voice stung, but Joseph understood. She needed someone to be angry at. Needed somewhere to direct the howling void inside her. If he had to be that target, so be it. Morrison stood as well, maintaining his calm demeanor. "Mrs. Pierce, I promise you, we are doing everything we can find out exactly what happened. The medical examiner will be able to tell us more about Mark's injuries, and we're pursuing several lines of investigation. In the meantime, we need to ask you both some questions about Mrs. Harlow's relationship with Mark and her recent behavior." "Her relationship was fine." Ruth's words came out clipped, defensive. "She was a wonderful grandmother. Mark loved spending time with her. Joseph thought about the red mark on Mark's arm from the juice incident. Thought about the way Nain's temper had seemed shorter lately, her patience thinner. He'd noticed it, had worried about it, but it said nothing. His silence had killed his son. The realization hit him like a physical blow. If he'd spoken up, if he'd insisted that Mark not spend time alone with Nain, if he'd trusted his instincts instead of deferring to Ruth's complicated relationship with her mother, Mark might still be alive. Mr. Pierce Morrison was looking at him. Do you have anything to add about Mrs. Harlow's relationship with your son? Joseph opened his mouth, then caught sight of Ruth's face. She was watching him with something approaching desperation, silently pleading with him not to contradict her, not to betray her mother. But Mark deserved the truth. Mark deserved justice, even if it tore the family apart. She's been different lately, Joseph said quietly. More irritable, quicker to anger. Joseph, don't. Ruth's voice broke. Please, he continued, his eyes on Morrison. Last month, Ruth told me that Nain had grabbed Mark's arm hard enough to leave a mark. She said Mark had spilled juice and Nain lost her temper. That was an accident. Ruth turned on him. Her face flushed. Mark exaggerated. He's 5 years old. Kids that age don't understand when they're making things sound worse than they are. He showed you the bruise. Ruth, you saw it yourself. It was barely even a bruise, just some redness. And my mother apologized. It was one incident. Morrison made a note on a small pad he'd produced from his jacket pocket. Were there any other incidents? Joseph thought back through the months. Small things that had seemed insignificant at the time now took on new weight. She yelled at him a lot, more than seemed necessary. Ruth said it was just Nain's way, that she'd been strict when Ruth was growing up, too. Stop it. Ruth's voice had gone cold. Stop making my mother sound like some kind of monster. You're doing exactly what they want you to do. She gestured at Morrison and Delgado. They're trying to build a case against her instead of doing their jobs and finding who really hurt Mark. Delgado stepped forward. Mrs. Pierce, I understand your instinct is to protect your mother. That's natural, but protecting her isn't the same as protecting the truth about what happened to your son. Get away from me. Ruth backed toward the door. Both of you, I'm done with this. I'm done with all of you. My son is dead and you're all standing around making up conspiracy theories instead of mourning him. She turned and walked out, her shoulders rigid, her steps quick and purposeful. The door swung shut behind her with a soft pneumatic kiss. Joseph sat back down, suddenly exhausted. She's in denial. She can't accept that her mother might have done this. Morrison sat as well, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. What do you think happened, Mr. Pierce? The question hung in the air between them. Joseph had been avoiding it, pushing away the dark thoughts that crept in whenever he closed his eyes, but Morrison was asking him to say it out loud to give voice to the terrible suspicion that had been growing in his gut since he'd seen that staged living room. I think Nain lost her temper. I think she hurt Mark, maybe worse than she intended. And then I think she panicked and tried to make it look like someone else did it. Saying it out loud made it real, made it heavy and solid and impossible to take back. Delgado and Morrison exchanged a glance. That's consistent with what the evidence is suggesting, Morrison said. But we need to be thorough. We're waiting on some key pieces of information. What pieces? Mrs. Harlow had a security camera installed on her front porch. She mentioned it in passing during her initial interview. Something about deterring raccoons from her trash cans. Joseph felt his heart rate pick up and we sent an officer to retrieve the footage. The camera faces the front door. I would have captured anyone entering or leaving the house this afternoon. If there was an intruder, we'll see them. And if there wasn't, Morrison's expression remained carefully neutral, but Joseph saw the answer in his eyes. They already knew. They were just building the case, gathering the evidence, crossing every procedural line before they moved forward. How long before you know for sure? Joseph asked. The medical examiner will need at least 48 hours for a full autopsy, but the security footage should give us a clearer picture within the next few hours. We'll keep you updated as we learn more. Joseph nodded slowly. 48 hours, 2 days before they'd have official confirmation of what he already knew in his bones. Nain had killed Mark. And then she called 911 and played the victim while Joseph's son lay dead in her bedroom. The rage that had been building beneath his grief finally found its focus. Not the wild, undirected fury of the first shock, but something colder, more deliberate, more patient. When you prove it, Joseph said quietly, his voice steady. When you prove she did this, I want to know. I want to be there when you arrest her. Morrison studied him for a long moment. Mr. Pierce, I understand your anger, but this is a police matter. You need to let us handle it. I'm not going to do anything stupid if that's what you're worried about. I'm not going to hunt her down or try to hurt her. Joseph met the detective's eyes, but I want to see her face when she realizes she can't lie her way out of this. I want her to know that I know what she did. That's not how this works. Then make it work. Joseph stood, his hands clenched at his sides. That woman killed my son and tried to frame a fictional burglar for it. She's probably at home right now crying to her friends about how traumatized she is, accepting their sympathy in casseroles. And my wife is going to rush over there to comfort her because Ruth can't see what's right in front of her face. He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at Morrison. Find a proof. Do your job, and when you have it, you tell me, because I deserve to know. Mark deserves for someone to stand up for him who isn't going to buy Nain's lies. Joseph left the police station and walked out into the parking lot. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed obscene in their beauty. How dare the world be beautiful when Mark was gone? His truck sat where he'd parked it 3 hours ago, though it felt like years had passed. He climbed in and sat there, his hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed. A text from Ruth. I'm at my mother's house. Don't come here. I can't see you right now. Joseph stared at the message, then typed back, when you're ready to face the truth, I'll be here. He didn't wait for a response. Instead, he started the engine and drove home to the empty house that would never again echo with Mark's laughter or the sound of a toy truck rolling across the kitchen floor. The next 3 days passed in a blur of terrible clarity. Joseph took leave from the auto shop, telling his boss simply that there had been a family emergency. He couldn't bring himself to say the words out loud. Couldn't stand the inevitable condolences and the awkward sympathy that would follow. Ruth stayed at her mother's house. She'd sent Joseph a handful of brief, cold texts letting him know she was okay, that she needed space, that she'd be home when she was ready. He understood on some level that she was clinging to her mother because Nain was the only parent she had left. If she accepted that Nain had killed Mark, Ruth would be completely alone. Better to blame Joseph for not protecting their son than to confront the woman who'd actually taken his life. On the morning of the third day, Detective Morrison called. Mr. Pierce, can you come to the station? We have some information we need to discuss with you. Joseph was there within 20 minutes. Morrison met him in the same waiting room where they'd spoken before. This time, he had a laptop with him. The screen angled away from Joseph's view. We retrieved the security footage from Mrs. Harlow's porch camera. I need to warn you that what you're about to see is disturbing. If you'd rather not, show me. Morrison turned the laptop around. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Timestamp from Thursday afternoon at 2:47 p.m. The camera had a wide-angle view of the porch and front door with a partial view into the living room through the screen door. For the first few seconds, nothing moved. Then Nain came into view, walking through the living room toward the kitchen. Mark followed behind her, his toy truck clutched in both hands, his mouth moving in what was probably the engine sounds he always made. Nain turned back and said something to him, her face twisted in irritation. Mark stopped walking, his shoulders hunching slightly. Even through the screen door, even the grainy footage, Joseph could see his son's body language shift from playful to weary. Nain's mouth moved again, her gesture sharp and angry. Mark said something back, his voice probably barely audible, probably some 5-year-old's attempt at an apology or explanation. That's when Nain's hand came up. The slap was fast and hard, catching Mark on the side of the head with enough force to knock him sideways. He stumbled. His toy truck flying from his hands and fell against the coffee table. The angle of the impact was terrible. The corner of the table caught him at the base of his skull and he dropped like a stone, his small body crumpling to the floor with a limpness that made Joseph's stomach lurch. Nain stood frozen for a moment, her hands still raised, her face a mask of shock. Then she dropped to her knees beside Mark, her hands fluttering over him, clearly trying to rouse him. Joseph watched, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth itched as Nain checked for breathing, felt for a pulse, watched her freeze when she found nothing. Watched her look around the room with growing panic, and then watched her stand up and systematically begin destroying her own living room. She pulled out drawers and dumped their contents, threw couch cushions across the room, knocked over the lamp, created the scene of chaos that Joseph had walked into. The timestamp showed 3:02 p.m. when she picked up Mark's body and carried it down the hallway out of the camera's view. When she returned 4 minutes later, her hands were empty. At 3:11 p.m., she walked out the front door, leaving it slightly ajar, and got in her car. The footage ended. Joseph sat in silence, his hands gripping the arms of the chair hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. He'd known, had suspected, had pieced it together from the evidence and the inconsistencies in Nain's story. But seeing it was different. Seeing his son's last moments, seeing the casual violence of that slap, seeing Nain's cold-blooded decision to cover up what she'd done rather than call for help, transformed suspicion into certainty and grief into something harder. She didn't even try to save him, Joseph said, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't call 911, didn't try CPR. She just decided to protect herself. Morrison closed the laptop gently. The medical examiner confirmed that Mark died from blunt force trauma to the back of the head consistent with impact against a hard edge. He would have lost consciousness immediately. Even if she called for help right away, the injury was catastrophic. But she didn't even try. No, she didn't. Joseph looked up at the detective. What happens now? We're obtaining an arrest warrant for Nain Harlow on charges of manslaughter and evidence tampering. We'll execute the warrant this afternoon. I won't be there. Morrison shook his head. That's not possible. This is an active arrest. You can't be present. Then tell me when it happens. Call me the minute you take her into custody. The detective studied him for a long moment. Mr. Pierce, I understand your need for justice, but I want you to think carefully about what comes next. Your wife is going to need you. This is going to devastate her. My wife is already devastated and right now she's being comforted by the woman who killed our son. Joseph stood, his movements controlled, but his voice edged with barely contained fury. When Ruth finds out the truth, when she can't deny it anymore, she's going to break, and I'll be there to pick up the pieces. But first, I need to know that Nain faces consequences for what she did. Morrison rose as well. We'll call you when it's done. Joseph received the call at 4:37 p.m. Nain had been arrested at her sister's house 2 towns over. When confronted with the security footage, she'd collapsed, sobbing that it wasn't supposed to happen like that she just wanted him to listen for once. Joseph hung up the phone and sat in his truck outside the police station, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back at him had aged a decade in 3 days. Had lost something fundamental in his eyes. Some light that had been permanently extinguished. His phone rang again. Ruth's name on the screen. Joseph. Her voice was raw. Broken. They arrested my mother. They're saying she killed Mark. Tell me it's not true. Please tell me they made a mistake. It's true, Ruth. I've seen the security footage. She hit him. He fell. And then she tried to cover it up. The sound that came through the phone was inhuman. A keening wail that rose and fell, punctuated by gasping breaths. Ruth, where are you? Let me come get you. How could she? The words dissolved into sobs. How can my own mother do this? He was just a baby. He was my baby. I know. I know. Tell me where you are. I'm at her sister's house. The police just left. Everyone's crying and I can't breathe. Joseph, I can't breathe. I'm coming. Stay there. I'm coming right now. He found her in the driveway of Nain's sister's house, sitting on the curb with her head between her knees. Nain's sister and brother-in-law stood on the porch, their faces pale with shock, watching Ruth with helpless concern. Joseph parked and walked over to his wife. He knelt beside her and put a hand on her back. Come on, let's go home. She looked up at him, her face blotchy and swollen from crying. I defended her. I told you were wrong. I told the police they were wrong. And all that time she knew. She knew what she did and she let me believe it was someone else. I know. How do we come back from this? How do we live with this? Joseph didn't have an answer. He simply helped her to her feet and guided her to his truck. Nain's sister called out something about being there if they needed anything, but Joseph didn't acknowledge it. These people had raised Nain, had helped shape the woman who'd killed his son. He had no interest in their sympathy. Ruth cried the entire drive home, silent tears streaming down her face as she stared out the window at the passing town. Joseph kept one hand on the wheel and one on her knee, a small gesture of solidarity in the face of sheer devastation. The courtroom was exactly what Joseph had expected. Cold fluorescent lighting, hard wooden benches worn smooth by decades of tragedy, an American flag hanging limply in the corner as if even it couldn't muster enthusiasm for the proceedings. He sat in the front row of the gallery, Ruth beside him, her hand occasionally reaching for his and then withdrawing as if she couldn't decide whether she wanted his comfort or needed to suffer alone. 6 weeks had passed since Mark's death. 6 weeks of sleepless nights, of Ruth's sudden crying jags in the middle of grocery stores, of the bedroom they kept as Mark sitting empty and untouched because neither of them could bear to sort through his toys. 6 weeks of learning to live in a world that felt fundamentally wrong, as if gravity had shifted and they were all walking at a slight angle to reality. The funeral had been small. Joseph had insisted on it, overriding Ruth's mother's sister, who'd wanted a large service with half of Maple Ridge in attendance. He'd stood at the graveside holding Ruth as they lowered their son into the ground, and he felt something inside him calcify into stone. Grief would have been easier, would have been softer. What he felt instead was a cold, patient rage that settled into his bones and became part of a skeleton. Now watching Nain enter the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, her hair uncombed and her face drawn, Joseph felt that rage sharpen into focus. Ruth made a small sound beside him, something between a gasp and a sob. Despite everything, despite the security footage and the confession and 6 weeks to process the truth, seeing her mother in chains still gutted her. Nain's eyes found Ruth immediately, and a naked plea in them made Joseph's jaw clench. She was still trying to manipulate them, still looking for sympathy, still acting as if she were the victim in this tragedy. Ruth looked away, her hands clenched in her lap. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Catherine Winters entered. She was a stern-faced woman in her 60s who had a reputation for being fair but uncompromising. Joseph had looked her up during the pretrial proceedings, reading every article he could find about her sentencing history. He needed to know if she would deliver justice or if Nain would somehow slip through the cracks of a sympathetic legal system. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Diana Reeves, stood and began laying out the case with clinical precision. She walked the jury through the evidence, the security footage, the medical examiner's report, Nain's history of anger management issues that stretched back decades. Nain Harlow has a documented history of losing control when confronted with minor frustrations, Reeves said, pulling up records on the projection screen. In 1987, she was fired from her position at Little Learners Daycare for grabbing a 4-year-old child by the arm hard enough to bruise when he wouldn't stop crying. In 1992, she was cited by Child Protective Services following a complaint from a neighbor who witnessed her shaking her own daughter during a tantrum. Ruth went rigid beside Joseph. She'd never mentioned that second incident, had probably never known about it. Another secret Nain had kept buried. In 2003, she was asked to leave a parenting class at the community center for becoming verbally aggressive with the instructor. And in 2019, just 6 years ago, her own daughter reported that Mrs. Harlow had grabbed her grandson hard enough to leave marks. Reeves turned to face the jury. This is not a pattern of isolated incidents. This is a pattern of a woman who, when frustrated, when challenged, when faced with the normal chaos of dealing with children, resorts to violence. And on April 14th of this year, that pattern had fatal consequences. She played the security footage. Joseph had watched it a dozen times by now, had memorized every terrible second, but hearing Ruth's sharp intake of breath as she saw it for the first time in court felt like being stabbed. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as they watched Nain slap Mark, watched him fall, watch her coldly stage the scene. When it ended, several jury members were wiping their eyes. Nain's defense attorney, a tired L-looking public defender named Richard Cross, did his best to argue for mitigating circumstances. Nain was a devoted grandmother. She'd been under stress. The slap wasn't intended to cause serious injury. The fall was a tragic accident. My client made terrible mistakes in the aftermath of this accident. Cross conceded. She panicked. She made the wrong choices. But this wasn't premeditated violence. This was a moment of frustration that spiraled into unimaginable tragedy. Joseph listened to the defense with his hands folded in his lap, his expression neutral. Cross was doing his job, making the arguments he was required to make. But they were lies wrapped in legal language, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. When it was time for Nain to take the stand, the courtroom fell into tense silence. She looked smaller than Joseph remembered, diminished somehow by the weight of what she'd done. Her attorney led her through a series of softball questions designed to humanize her. Yes, she loved her grandson. Yes, she'd watched him every week with joy. Yes, she'd been looking forward to seeing him grow up. Then Reeves stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Harlow, why did you hit Mark? Nain's voice trembled. He was talking back, being defiant. I'd asked him 3 times to put his truck away, and he ignored me. So, you hit a 5-year-old child for not putting away his toy fast enough. I didn't mean to hit him that hard. I just wanted to get his attention. And when he fell and struck his head on the coffee table, what did you do? I checked on him. I tried to wake him up. The security footage shows you standing over his body for approximately 30 seconds before you checked his breathing. What were you doing during those 30 seconds? Nain's eyes dropped. I was in shock. Were you in shock when you spent the next 15 minutes staging a fake robbery? I panicked. I didn't know what to do. Reeves moved closer to the witness stand. You knew enough to pull out drawers, to throw cushions, to knock over furniture. You knew enough to carry your grandson's body to a bedroom and close the door. You knew enough to drive to a neighbor's house and call 911 with a fabricated story. That's not panic, Mrs. Harlow. That's calculation. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Nain's voice rose. I love Mark. He was my grandson. If you loved him, why didn't you call an ambulance? Why didn't you try to save him? I was scared. Scared of what? Of being held accountable for your actions. Cross objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Nain's true face. Not a grieving grandmother destroyed by a tragic accident, but a woman who prioritized her own self-preservation over a child's life. When they broke for lunch, Ruth stood on shaking legs and walked out of the courtroom without a word. Joseph followed her to the hallway where she leaned against the wall, her eyes closed, breathing deeply. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "No," she opened her eyes. "I keep thinking about all the times I left Mark with her. All the times I ignored the signs that something was wrong because it was easier than confronting my mother. I'm as responsible for this as she is." "No." Joseph's voice was firm. "You're not. You didn't hit him. You didn't let him die. You didn't cover it up. Nain made every one of those choices. But I should have protected him. That was my job. I'm his mother. We both should have. I saw the warning signs, too, and said nothing. But beating ourselves up doesn't change what happened. The only person responsible for Mark's death is in that courtroom wearing handcuffs." Ruth looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "How are you so calm? How can you just sit there and not what? Scream, break down, storm a defendant's table, and attack her?" Joseph's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath because that's not justice. That's chaos. And I want her to face real consequences, not get off on a mistrial because I couldn't control myself. I don't know if I can go back in there. Then don't go home. I'll tell you what happens." Ruth shook her head. "No, I need to see this through. I need to watch her face when they read the verdict." They returned to the courtroom for closing arguments. Reeves was methodical and devastating, walking the jury through every piece of evidence, every lie, every calculated decision Nain had made to save herself at the expense of the truth. Cross made a desperate plea for leniency, painting Nain as a woman destroyed by grief and poor judgment rather than malice. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Joseph and Ruth waited in the hallway, sitting on a bench and saying nothing. What was there to say? No verdict would bring Mark back. No sentence would erase the last 6 weeks. They were simply waiting for society to acknowledge what they already knew. That Nain had taken their son from them and deserved to be punished. When the bailiff called them back into the courtroom, Joseph's heart rate remained steady. He learned over the past weeks that his body had 2 settings now. A low simmer of constant anguish and explosive rage. There was no in-between, no normal human range of emotion, just those 2 states alternating based on circumstances. Judge Winters addressed the jury. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman, a middle-aged man with graying temples, stood. "We have, Your Honor, on the charge of voluntary manslaughter." "How do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." Ruth's breath caught. Nain dropped her head into her hands, her shoulders shaking on the charge of evidence tampering. "Guilty." Joseph felt Ruth's hand find his and squeeze hard enough that her nails dug into his palm. He didn't pull away. Judge Winters set a sentencing date for 2 weeks later, and the bailiff led Nain out of the courtroom. As she passed their row, she looked directly at Ruth, mouthing the words, "I'm sorry." Ruth turned her face away. Outside the courthouse, Reeves found them on the steps. "I know this doesn't make it better. I know nothing can, but justice was served today." Joseph nodded. "Thank you for your work on this case. The sentencing hearing is in 2 weeks. You'll have the opportunity to give a victim impact statement if you'd like. Both of you." Ruth shook her head immediately. I can't stand up there and talk about what she took from us." "I'll do it," Joseph said. "I'll make sure she understands exactly what she's destroyed." The sentencing hearing arrived sooner than Joseph expected. He'd spent the 2 weeks writing and rewriting his statement, trying to find words adequate to express the scope of Nain's crime. Every version felt insufficient. How could he explain what it was like to come home to an empty house? To walk past Mark's bedroom and remember the sound of his laugh? To see other fathers with their sons and feel the absence like a physical wound? In the end, he kept it simple. When Judge Winters called him to speak, Joseph stood and walked to the podium. Nain sat at the defense table, her eyes downcast, her hands folded on the table in front of her. Ruth remained in the gallery, having decided at the last minute that she needed to hear what Joseph would say. Joseph pulled out his prepared statement, then set it aside. The words he'd written felt too polished, too rehearsed. This needed to be raw. Mar Pierce was 5 years old. He loved dinosaurs and trucks and chocolate ice cream. He laughed at the dumbest jokes. He gave the best hugs. He had his whole life ahead of him. Joseph's voice remained steady, each word measured and clear. Nain Harlow took that life not in a moment of true accident, not in a split second where judgment failed. She took it in a series of calculated choices. The choice to hit him. The choice not to call for help. The choice to stage a crime scene. The choice to lie to police. The choice to let me and my wife believe a stranger had broken into her home when she knew the truth the entire time. He looked directly at Nain, now forcing her to meet his eyes. She doesn't get to claim she panicked. She doesn't get to claim it was an accident. Accidents don't involve 15 minutes of staging evidence. Accidents don't involve calling 911 with a fabricated story. She made conscious decisions one after another to protect herself instead of trying to save my son, or at least having the decency to tell the truth about what she'd done. Ruth was crying quietly in the gallery. Joseph heard her but didn't look away from Nain. Mark deserved better than to die on his grandmother's floor while she decided how to avoid responsibility. He deserved better than to be left alone while she drove to a neighbor's house to create an alibi. And he deserves better than a grandmother who's still making this about her own victimhood instead of the life she ended. Joseph paused, letting the words settle. I don't forgive her. I won't forgive her. And I hope the court sends a message that a child's life matters more than the comfort and freedom of the adult who took it. He returned to his seat. Ruth reached for his hand and held it tightly. Nain's attorney tried to offer mitigating factors. Her age, her remorse, her lack of prior criminal record, but Judge Winter's expression suggested she'd already made her decision. Mrs. Harlow, you have been found guilty of voluntary manslaughter and evidence tampering in the death of your 5-year-old grandson. These crimes represent not only a failure of judgment, but a failure of basic human decency. You had multiple opportunities to make better choices, and at every turn, you chose self-preservation over the truth. Judge Winters looked down at her notes, then back at Nain. The maximum sentence for voluntary manslaughter is 11 years. The maximum for evidence tampering is 7 years. I'm sentencing you to 11 years for manslaughter and 7 years for evidence tampering to be served consecutively. That's 18 years in prison. Ruth gasped. Nain swayed in her seat and her attorney had to steady her. You will be eligible for parole after serving 70% of your sentence, but that decision will be up to the parole board. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell with a sharp crack that echoed in the sudden silence. 18 years. Nain would be 80 years old when she was released if she lived that long. Joseph felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just a grim sense of completion. The system had worked. Justice had been served. It wouldn't bring Mark back, but it acknowledged that his life had mattered. That taking it had consequences. Ruth stood, her movements mechanical, and walked out of the courtroom without waiting for Joseph. He found her in the parking lot, leaning against their truck, her face pale. 18 years, she whispered. My mother will die in prison. Yes, probably. I should feel something. Grief or relief or anger? But I just feel empty. Joseph opened the passenger door for her. Empty is normal. We've been running on adrenaline and shock for 2 months now. Now it's over and there's nothing left to fill the space. They drove home in silence through the streets of Maple Ridge that no longer felt like home. Too many memories haunted every corner. The playground where Mark had learned to swing. The ice cream shop where he'd changed his order 3 times. The park where they'd celebrated his 5th birthday with dinosaur cupcakes and 20 giggling children. When they pulled into their driveway, Ruth finally spoke. I can't stay here in this town, in this house. Everything reminds me of him and of what she did. Then we'll move, Joseph said simply. We'll find somewhere new, somewhere without ghosts. Ruth looked at him, surprised. Just like that, you leave your job. Your life here? My life was marked. The job was just how I paid for it. None of that matters anymore. They sat in the truck for a long time, watching the sun sink behind the pine trees. Neither of them ready to go into the empty house. Finally, Ruth said, I'm sorry I blamed you. In the beginning, I'm sorry I chose to believe my mother over you. You were protecting yourself. I understand that. No, it was more than that. It was easier to be angry at you than to admit my mother was capable of killing her child. I took the coward's way out. Joseph turned to look at her. We both missed signs. We both made mistakes. But the difference is we would have died before intentionally hurting Mark. Nain made a choice. That's on her and not us. Ruth nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes. Do you think we'll ever be okay again? No. Joseph's honesty was brutal but necessary. We'll learn to live with it. We'll build something that looks like a life, but we'll never be okay. And that's what she took from us. Not just Mark, but any chance of being whole. They finally went inside into the house that felt cavernous without Mark's presence. Joseph walked past his son's bedroom, the door still closed, the room beyond untouched since the day he died. Tomorrow, he thought, tomorrow they'd start packing. Tomorrow they begin the process of leaving Maple Ridge behind. Tonight, they would simply survive. 3 months after the sentencing, Joseph and Ruth stood in the driveway of a small house near Clearwater Lake, 2 hours from Maple Ridge. The moving truck had left an hour ago, and the boxes inside still needed unpacking. But for the first time in months, Joseph could breathe without feeling like his lungs were filled with broken glass. The house was smaller than their old one, a modest 2-bedroom cottage with weathered siding and a view of the lake through the pines. It needed work. The porch steps were loose. The kitchen faucet dripped. The bathroom tiles were cracked. But that was fine. Joseph needed projects. Needed something to do with his hands besides clench them into fists. Ruth had found a job at the county recorder's office in the nearby town of Lakeside. Different county, different faces, different people who didn't know their tragedy and wouldn't offer unwanted sympathy every time they walked into the grocery store. They'd agreed before moving. No one here needed to know about Mark unless they chose to tell them. Their grief was private, sacred, not fodder for small-town gossip. Joseph had taken a job as a mechanic at a local garage, working under a gruff 50-year-old named Pete, who asked no personal questions and expected only competence. The work was the same as it had been in Maple Ridge. Diagnosis, repairs, oil changes, the occasional complex rebuild, but here it felt like therapy instead of obligation. Ruth came to stand beside him on the porch, looking out at the lake with a late afternoon sun turn the water in a hammered gold. Mark wanted to come here, she said quietly. Do you remember? Last summer, we drove past and he saw the boat launch and begged us to take him fishing. I remember. We said we'd come back when he was older. When he could handle holding a rod. We should have just taken him. Should have bought a cheap rod at Walmart and spent the day here. Even if we didn't catch anything, Joseph put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. We made the best decisions we could with the information we had. We thought we had time. I keep thinking about all the things he'll never get to do. Never learn to ride a bike. Never have his first day of kindergarten. Never lose his first tooth or learn to tie his shoes or any of it. I know, Joseph's voice was rough. I think about it every day. They stood there as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the lake's surface. A fish jumped somewhere out in the deeper water, the splash carrying clearly in the evening quiet. Do you think we'll ever have more children? Ruth asked, her voice so soft Joseph almost didn't hear it. The question landed like a stone in still water. Ripples spreading outward. They hadn't talked about this, had been too focused on survival to think about the future beyond the next day, the next week. Do you want to? Joseph asked carefully. I don't know. Sometimes I think yes, that we could honor Mark by raising another child and giving them all the love we have. But then I think about loving someone that much again and the idea of losing them, too. She trailed off, shaking her head. I don't know if I could survive it twice. Then we don't decide now. We just keep moving forward one day at a time. And if someday you want to talk about it again, we will. Ruth leaned her head against his shoulder. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just too tired to overthink things anymore. They went inside as darkness fell, navigating around boxes labeled in Ruth's neat handwriting. Kitchen, pots and pans, living room, books, bathroom, towels. One box sat in the corner of the living room, unlabeled, sealed with extra tape. Neither of them had opened it. Neither of them had suggested opening it. Mark's things, his toys, his clothes, his stuffed animals. They'd packed them before leaving Maple Ridge, unable to throw them away, but not ready to look at them either. That night, lying in their new bed in their new bedroom, Ruth reached for Joseph's hand in the darkness. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not giving up on us, on everything. It would have been easier to let this destroy us, to blame each other and split apart. But you stayed. Where else would I go? You're all I have left. I love you. The words hung in the darkness between them, fragile and precious. Joseph squeezed her hand. I love you, too. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Joseph worked at the garage, came home, worked on the house. He replaced the porch steps, fixed the dripping faucet, retiled the bathroom. Ruth settled into her job, made tentative friendships with coworkers, slowly rebuilt a life that looked almost normal from the outside. But the cracks showed in quiet moments. Ruth's sudden tears in the grocery store when she passed the cereal aisle and saw Mark's favorite brand. Joseph's insomnia lying awake at 3 a.m. replaying every decision that had led to that Thursday afternoon. The way they both avoided parks and playgrounds, crossed the street rather than walk past a group of children. Grief, Joseph learned, wasn't linear. It didn't follow the neat stages outlined in the pamphlets the Victim Services Office had given them. It was a tide that came and went according to its own schedule, sometimes receding enough that they could function, sometimes crashing over them with renewed force when they least expected it. For months after moving to Clearwater Lake, Ruth brought up her mother for the first time since the sentencing. They were eating dinner on the porch, grilled chicken and vegetables that neither of them had much appetite for. When Ruth set down her fork and said, "She wrote to me." Joseph's jaw tightened. "Nain." "Yes. A letter from prison. It came to my work address. I don't know how she got it." "What did it say?" "I didn't open it. I threw it away." Joseph studied his wife's face, looking for cracks in the careful composure she'd built. "Do you want to know what it said?" "No." "Yes." "I don't know." Ruth pushed her plate away. "Part of me wants to hear what she has to say. Part of me never wants to hear her voice again, even in writing." "Is that normal?" "I think there's no normal way to feel about the mother who killed your child." "She asked to see me. Before I threw the letter away, I saw the first line. It said, 'Please visit me.'" I need to explain the rage Joseph had been keeping carefully contained flared hot in his chest. "Explain what?" "We saw the video. We heard her confession. What else is there to explain?" "I don't know. But she's still my mother, Joseph. Even after everything, part of me still." Ruth's voice broke. "Part of me still wants my mom. Isn't that sick?" "It's human." Joseph forced his voice to stay level. "But you need to understand something. If you go see her, if you let her back into your life even a little, she'll use it. She'll manipulate you. She'll make herself the victim and you'll end up comforting her instead of getting closure. You think I don't know that? You think I don't see exactly what she'd do?" Ruth stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the porch boards. "But maybe I need to hear her try. Maybe I need to see her face when she attempts to justify what she did. Maybe that's the only way I can finally let go of the little girl inside me who still wants her mother's love." Joseph stood as well. "Then go. I won't stop you, but I won't go with you. And I won't pretend to understand it. I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking you not to judge me for it." They stared at each other across the table, the gulf between them widening. This was the first real fight they'd had since Mark's death. The first time their grief had pointed them in opposite directions instead of binding them together. Finally, Joseph said, "I can't tell you what to do, but I need you to know that if you visit her, if you let her worm her way back into your heart, it will destroy you. She'll feed you lies and excuses and apologies that mean nothing. And you'll want to believe them because believing them is easier than accepting that your mother is a monster. Maybe she's not a monster. Maybe she's just broken. Broken people don't spend 15 minutes staging crime scenes. Broken people don't let children die to save themselves. She's not broken, Ruth. She's evil. And evil doesn't deserve redemption." Ruth's eyes fill with tears. "When did you become so cold?" "When our son died." Joseph's voice was flat, emotionless. "When I realized that forgiveness is a luxury we can't afford. Mark doesn't get to forgive her. He doesn't get to have opinions or make choices or grow up. So, I'm not going to forgive on his behalf and pretend like what happened was somehow understandable." Ruth grabbed her purse from the porch railing and walked to her car without another word. Joseph watched her drive away, watched the tail lights disappear down the road toward town, and felt something inside him settle into permanent hardness. She needed to work through this on her own. He'd said his piece. The rest was up to her. Ruth didn't come home until after midnight. Joseph was sitting in the living room, a book open on his lap that he hadn't read a single word of when he heard her key in the lock. She came in quietly, set her purse on the counter, and stood in the kitchen doorway looking at him. "I drove to the prison," she said, "got halfway through the visitor registration process, and then walked out. I couldn't do it. I couldn't sit across from her and listen to her excuses." Joseph closed his book. "What?" "Change your mind. I remembered something from when I was 7. I broke one of her favorite vases playing ball in the house. It was an accident, but she was so angry. She grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me hard enough that my teeth rattled. Then she made me stand in the corner for 3 hours. No bathroom breaks, no dinner, just standing there while she went about her evening like nothing was happening." Ruth's voice was steady now, the tears gone. "I'd forgotten that, pushed it down. But sitting in that waiting room, filling out forms to see her, it came back and I realized that Mark wasn't the first time she'd lost control. Wasn't even the first time she'd hurt a child. She just finally went too far with the one person whose death couldn't be hidden or explained away." She crossed the room and sat beside Joseph on the couch. "You were right. She would have manipulated me, would have cried and apologized and made me feel like I was the bad daughter for not forgiving her. And I would have left feeling guilty instead of getting closure." Joseph put his arm around her. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been so harsh earlier." "No, you were exactly harsh enough. I needed to hear it. Needed someone to remind me that my first loyalty is to Mark, not to the woman who killed him." They sat in silence for a long time. the house settling around them with small creaks and sighs. Finally, Ruth said, "I'm going to write her a letter. Tell her not to contact me again. That she doesn't get to be part of my life anymore." "Is that wrong?" "No, it's necessary." Ruth wrote the letter the next morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside her. Joseph watched from the doorway as she filled 3 pages with precise handwriting, stopped to wipe her eyes, then continued writing. When she finished, she folded the pages and slid them into an envelope without showing Joseph the contents. He didn't ask to read them. Some things needed to be private. "Will you mail it with me?" she asked. "I don't want to do it alone." They drove into town together, parked outside the post office, and walked to the blue mailbox on the corner. Ruth held the envelope for a long moment, her thumb tracing the address she'd written on the front. "Once I send this, it's final. No more chances. No more relationship. She ended the relationship when she killed Mark." Joseph said gently, "This is just you acknowledging it." Ruth nodded and slid the envelope through the slot. They heard it drop into the bin below with a soft thud. "Okay." Ruth took a shaky breath. "It's done." They walked back to the truck hand in hand, and Joseph felt something in Ruth's grip that hadn't been there before. Not healing exactly, but maybe the beginning of acceptance. The 1-year anniversary of Mark's death fell on a Thursday, the same day of the week he died. Joseph had taken the day off work. Ruth had done the same. They talked about how to mark the day, whether to visit his grave back in Maple Ridge or to stay at the lake and remember him privately. In the end, Joseph knew where he needed to be. He woke before dawn, dressed quietly while Ruth still slept, and drove to Clearwater Lake. The boat launch was deserted at this hour, just Joseph and the morning mist rising off the water. He carried the red toy truck in his hands. He found in one of the boxes 3 months ago, and had spent 2 careful evenings gluing it back together, piece by piece, until it looked almost whole. The cracks were still visible if you looked closely, but from a distance it might have been new. Joseph sat on the boat launch dock, his boots dangling over the water, and set the truck on the weathered wood beside him. "Hey buddy," he said quietly, his voice rough with unshed tears. "I know you can't hear me. Don't know if there's anything after this or if you're just gone, but I need to say some things anyway." A fish jumped out in the deeper water, rings spreading across the glassy surface. "I'm sorry I wasn't there to protect you. Sorry I left you with someone I knew had a temper. Sorry I didn't trust my instincts and keep you safe. That's on me, and I'll carry you for the rest of my life." Joseph picked up the truck, turned it over in his hands, felt the ridges where the glue had dried. "But I want you to know that I did right by you after. Made sure the truth came out. Made sure she paid for what she did. She's in prison, Mark. 18 years. She doesn't get to hurt anyone else. She doesn't get to walk away like nothing happened." He set the truck down on a flat rock at the edge of the dock where the water lapped gently at the stone. "Your mom and I moved here to the lake. Remember when you wanted to go fishing? We're here now building a new life. It's not the same without you. We'll never be the same, but we're surviving. We're standing. And some days that's enough." Joseph stood, looked down at the truck one last time. The rising sun caught the red paint, making it gleam like fire. "I miss you, kid. Every single day, but you can rest now. Justice is done. You're not forgotten, and you never will be." He walked back to his truck as the sun climbed higher, painting the leg gold and pink and orange. He didn't look back at the toy. It belonged here now. A marker of memory at the place Mark had wanted to visit but never got the chance. Ruth was awake when he got home, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee and one of Mark's old picture books open on her lap. "You went to the lake," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah. Left his truck there. Felt right." Ruth nodded. "I've been sitting here reading his favorite story. The one about the dinosaur who was afraid of the dark." Joseph sat beside her, looking at the familiar illustrations. How many times had he read this book? 50? 100? He could recite it from memory. "Do you think we'll ever stop missing him?" Ruth asked. "No, but maybe we'll get better at living with it." They sat on the porch as the morning warmed, reading the dinosaur book aloud to each other, remembering the boy who had loved it so much he demanded it every night at bedtime. It hurt, but it was also necessary. This remembering Mark deserved to be more than a tragedy. He deserved to be celebrated, to be held in memory with love instead of just grief. Later that afternoon, they drove to the cemetery in Maple Ridge, stood at Mark's grave, and laid fresh flowers. They didn't stay long. The town held too many ghosts, too many painful memories. On the drive back to Clearwater Lake, Ruth said, "I'm ready." "Ready for what?" "To unpack that last box. The one with Mark's things." Joseph glanced at her, saw the determination in her face mixed with fear. You sure? No, but we can't keep it sealed forever, and I'd rather do it together than alone. That evening, they sat on the living room floor and carefully cut the tape on the box they'd both been avoiding for a year. Inside were the pieces of Mark's life, his favorite stuffed dinosaur worn soft from countless hugs, his Batman pajamas, a handful of drawings he'd made at preschool, the wooden puzzle of the United States they'd given him for his 5th birthday. Ruth picked up each item carefully, her tears falling silently. Joseph sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his own eyes burning. What do we do with it all? Ruth whispered. We keep what we need to remember him by, and we donate the rest so other kids can have what he can't. They sorted through the box slowly, carefully, making 3 piles: keep, donate, and uncertain. By the time they finished, the keep pile was small, the stuffed dinosaur, one of his drawings, a baby blanket, but precious. Ruth held the stuffed dinosaur to her chest, breathing in the faint scent that still clung to the fabric. Thank you for being here, for not giving up on us. We're all we have left, Joseph said simply. We hold on to each other or we drown. They packed up the donate items and took them to the children's hospital in Lakeside the next day. It felt right giving Mark's things to children who needed comfort and distraction. It felt like honoring his memory instead of just hoarding relics of a life cut short. Months passed, then a year, then another. Joseph and Ruth built a life at Clearwater Lake that looked almost normal from the outside. They worked. They renovated the house. They made friends with neighbors who knew their loss, but respected their privacy. They learned to laugh again, though the laughter sometimes felt fragile, like glass that might shatter if handled too roughly. Ruth never visited her mother, never responded to the occasional letters that arrived. Each one returned to sender unopened. Nain existed in a separate reality now. Locked away behind bars and locked out of Ruth's heart. Joseph heard updates occasionally through the prosecutor's office. Nain had been denied parole at her first hearing, had been cited for disciplinary infractions in prison. The news brought Joseph no satisfaction, just a distant sense that the universe was continuing to hold her accountable in his absence. On what would have been Mark's 8th birthday, Joseph and Ruth scattered wildflower seeds along the shore of Clearwater Lake. They didn't say anything as they walked hand in hand, dropping seeds every few steps. But the gesture felt right, a living memorial, something that would grow and bloom and return year after year. That night, sitting on their porch and watching the sunset paint the water, Ruth said, I've been thinking about what you asked, about more children. Joseph looked at her, his heart rate picking up. And I think I want to try, not to replace Mark. We could never replace him, but to honor him by raising a child who gets to have the future he was denied. Joseph took her hand, squeezed it gently. You sure? As sure as I can be about anything anymore, which is to say, terrified, but willing to try. Then we'll try. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began to appear in the clear sky above the lake. The pain of losing Mark would never fully heal. The anger at Nain's actions would never fully fade. But life continued, demanding to be lived, insisting on moving forward even when the past felt like an anchor. Joseph thought about his son, about the boyhood loved trucks and dinosaurs and chocolate ice cream, about the future that had been stolen from him and the justice that had been delivered on his behalf. Mark, he whispered to the night air, I kept my promise, made sure she paid, made sure the truth came out, and now we're going to do something she can never take away. We're going to live. We're going to build something good, and we're going to make sure you're never forgotten. A gentle breeze moved across the water, rustling through the pine trees. Joseph chose to believe it was Mark somehow somewhere giving his approval. Ruth leaned her head on his shoulder and they watched the stars emerge one by one above Clearwater Lake. 2 people who'd survived the unthinkable and found a way to keep standing. Not healed, not whole, but standing. And for now, for today, for this moment, that was enough.